Dakota Reid, and I'm going to be talking today about a report that I did into mapping the distributions of the Drab Looper, Drinker and Lackey Moths in Vice County 22. So Vice County 22 is Berkshire and part of Oxfordshire, and you might be able to tell from my accent that's not where I'm from Belfast. But this is an area that I'm slightly familiar with and I'm very enthusiastic about moths. So I did this project remotely using Qgis, which is the open source GIS platform. So the three species are shown down here on the right, the Drab Looper at the top, which is nationally scarce, category B, so it is a rare moth, then the Drinker, and then the Lackey. The Drab Looper is found in sort of open woodlands, open rides, that sort of thing, with where there's wood spurge found. The Drinker is sort of damper habitats, but can also be found in damp open woodland, but also scrub, damp grassland, that sort of place, but can be found in gardens. And the Lackey can be found in sort of hedgerows and places like that, and also in gardens. And the distributions of the three are shown here. So the Drab Looper is top right, and it is all concentrated in the centre of VC22 in quite a small area, and there aren't a lot of records. More records for Drinker and Lackey. With the Drinker, they're quite evenly spread, well, they're still quite clustered, but much more widely spread across the Vice County than the Drab Looper. And then the Lackey is the same, quite widely spread, but still quite notable gaps in the Vice County where the Lackey is not found. So I'm just going to talk about one species today because I wouldn't have time to go through all three, so I'm going to go through the Drab Looper because I think that was the most sort of interesting species to map because of its close relationship with its food plant, and also probably the most pertinent species to map because of its scarcity. And this is a species that's disappeared from places like Oxfordshire, which encompasses part of Vice County 22. So it is quite important that we know where it is in Berkshire and that we do what we can to protect it. So the Drab Looper, I've used a heat map here to show where it is concentrated, and it is all this sort of area in the centre of the Vice County. And this is a sort of closer look of where those records are all found, ignoring this one that's sort of just over in Hampshire here. But I've used habitat polygons here. It was quite it's relatively complicated to align the habitat categories with the polygons I had with the habitats that the Drab Looper likes. So I've categorized them in two different ways. So the purple ones are ideal habitat types and the pink ones are potentially ideal. I did this for things like woodland. The woodland habitat types, it was, you know, things like, was it a plantation or was it natural woodland, was it broadleafed, was it coniferous, but it wouldn't necessarily give you an indication of whether that polygon was going to be open or quite close woodland, or if it was going to be damp, or if it was going to be quite dry woodland. So I didn't want to rule things out that could have been potentially good habitat, so those are the ones that I put in pink where it wasn't as clear whether or not they would be ideal for Drab Looper. But you can see here that there are quite a few clusters at particular sites, and not an awful lot of records in total, but a decent number for the area. So they're all found in this area west of Reading, north of the Kennet River, found in Fencewood, Paceswood, which is the only location south of the Kennet River, Burgess's Copse, Hawkridge Wood, Coombe Greathouse Wood, Ashhampstead Common and Moor Copse. And they're quite clustered. I did a nearest neighbour analysis and the index came out at 0.227, so they are showing quite a cluster distribution. I then did sort of analyse the site types, so I had a layer of all the different sites and reduced it down to a couple of types of sites. So the local wildlife sites, or proposed local wildlife sites for Berkshire, are in this turquoise colour, and then in blue you have the SPAs, the SACs and the SSSIs, and they're basically all of the records are found on one of those two sort of groupings that I've put together, but slightly more on the local wildlife sites. But they're not really being found off these sorts of site designations, which does suggest this is a species that really thrives where a site's been really managed for wildlife rather than just in general sites, such as the conservation target areas or the biodiversity opportunity areas, where there isn't that same sort of focused management for nature. And then I did some mapping with the Wood Spurge. This was quite important, and this was something that I couldn't do as much with the Drinker and Lackey, because those two are much more generalist. The Drinker would rely on quite a number of grass food plants at its larval stage, and the Lackey, the same, would have quite a few food plants. But with the Drab Looper, because it has such a strong relationship with the Wood Spurge, it was really useful to map where the Wood Spurge is, because that's probably a clearer indication than the habitat polygons of where is going to be ideal habitat for this species. So I was able to do distance to nearest hub line to hub analysis between the records for Drab Looper and the records for Wood Spurge. And you can see here they're in yellow. So this is the small area where all of the Drab Loopers are found, and we're ignoring the Hampshire record. And they're all quite close to a Wood Spurge record. And removing that anomalous record in the south there, I calculated the average distance between the records, and it was 186 metres. Of course, it might not be, our Wood Spurge records might not be completely comprehensive, so there could be areas where Wood Spurge has actually grown a bit closer to where we're now recording Drab Loopers. So it is possible that in a lot of cases that figure actually, it might be a little bit lower than what we're seeing, because we can't know that we've documented every single Wood Spurge plant. But even then, less than 200 metres away from the nearest Wood Spurge plant does show that really strong relationship. And as Drab Looper can be found to be nectaring on species such as thistle a small distance away from Wood Spurge, that's really to be expected that they're going to always be nearby this food plant. So the aim of my analysis was really to see where are the Drab Loopers in Vice County 22 and where else could they be, and that's either where they could already be but are under recorded, or where they could potentially establish themselves in this sort of vicinity of where they're currently existing. So an obvious caveat is that I'm doing this all based on mapping, and on the ground these habitats may or may not be ideal. So this is just a starting point for seeing where might be good spots to investigate whenever the Drab Looper flight season comes around, to see if the species is actually present in these areas and not recorded, or to have a look at them during this period and see, is there actually adequate Wood Spurge, or maybe the records are a little bit out of date. I did remove older records to try and avoid that problem, but it is important to look at these sites on the ground. This is just a starting point to see what sites may be a good place to start looking. So one of these areas was Upper Buckle Breeze. You'll see here so just a reminder, the purple polygons are the ideal habitat types, the pink are the potentially ideal habitat types, turquoise are local wildlife sites, and then the blue here are the SPAs, SSSIs and SACs. The red points are Drab Looper records, and then these orange diamonds are Wood Spurge records. I've changed those just to make them stand out, changed to a different colour that'll stand out more against the sites, because I wanted to include all of this data in one. And there are areas here where you're seeing the purple on the turquoise, which is ideal habitat on local wildlife sites, which is what they're mostly occurring on, and with good Wood Spurge. And this is an area then that we'd expect, hopefully, the Drab Looper should be found. You can see there are Drab Loopers north of this area that we're talking about, and actually to the east as well. So this is a sort of area where they might be, but they're not recorded, or they potentially could establish if the site's well managed. The Thiel Engelfeed airstrip is a similar situation. You have this area here that looks quite ideal for Drab Loopers, and up here you have other populations and down around here, so it's not too far away from where they're already being recorded. The area around Pangbourne College could also be in a similar situation, but the habitat might be a little bit fragmented in this area. And then now you're sort of moving to the sort of outskirts of where they're currently being recorded. This area around sort of Snellsmore Common is potentially a good area for Drab Loopers, especially around this sort of southern end where we have the Wood Spurge really being recorded. And this is sort of on the sort of western edge of where they're being recorded in the Vice County. And then Hermitage, similar situation. There are quite a lot of Drab Looper records in this area, but this area up here, closer to the M4, there are good habitat pockets there where the Drab Loopers don't seem to be. So that could maybe be an extension of colonies that we already know exist, just a little bit further north. Or they may not be there, perhaps the habitat isn't appropriate. And then the final site, the final sort of area where it could work for Drab Loopers is the Streatley Lower Basildon area. And again, we have lots of areas where we've got ideal habitat on local wildlife sites, and we've got the Wood Spurge. So these are all places where during their flight season it could potentially be places where we could find that there are colonies that aren't recorded, or we could see, well, if they're not occurring here, why is that? Could we manage it in a better way? Would they be likely to establish here? So this is just a starting point really for that. So all the 3 species are present and are being recorded in Vice County 22, and we can draw sort of different conclusions based on this sort of mapping process that then can sort of lead to further investigation actually in the field. And the Drab Looper was a really nice species to study because of how specialised it is, and you can use things like the food plant points as well, and that's very effective because of the strong relationship between the two. And this can help us inform site management. Can we be managing sites better where they're under-recorded because they're reoccurring in very small numbers? Could we manage sites better where they could establish, if that would potentially be possible? And also, where are they is important as well, because we need to make sure that we continue making sure that those habitats are ideal for them where they already exist, because the last thing we want is this species being lost from Berkshire as it was from Oxfordshire. So obviously there are always caveats around these things, recorder bias, and actually seeing if these are suitable habitats on the ground. But this is just a starting point to sort of have a greater focus in the field on these species conservation within Vice County 22. So thank you very much for listening, and thank you of course to Ellen Lee for all of your help with getting me started with Qgis, and yeah, it's been really interesting to study these 3 species.